Therapy Notes, the highest rated EHR software for mental health professionals, is better than ever before. With free, live customer support available 24/7, they provide all the tools you need to succeed, whether you're a solo clinician or part of a group practice. Try it for free for 2 months with promo code MODERN today.
You learned a lot in grad school, but not how to run a profitable practice. Green Oak Accounting's Money for Therapists practice startup course bridges that gap. Get your practice's finances in order from the start. Visit greenoakaccounting.com/startup to learn more.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things going on in our field, the things going on in our world that affect our field. And we're dropping a couple of episodes together to take on a little bit of a human interest kind of perspective around how the Israel-Hamas conflict is affecting those in our community. And so we encourage you to listen to both of these episodes together to create some space. And in this particular episode, we are joined by Halina Brooke, LPC, to talk about some of the Jewish therapist experience that has been going on. And this conversation is about half an hour long. We are not going to get to everything in this, nor do we have necessarily an agenda for how this is going to arrive and what people should do other than listen and have some nuance to a lot of the conversations that we're having. And in our counterpart episode, we have pretty much the same intentions. So joining us on and helping us to learn through this and helping us to see what has been happening, especially over the last 12 months when it comes to Jewish therapists, anti-Semitism as it comes up in our field. Thank you so much for spending some time and helping us to have this conversation.
Thank you so much, Curt. And I have to say, with the episodes that I've listened to in the past, it's an honor to be participating and joining the ranks with your past guests.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, and we're glad to have you here. Thank you so much for making the time for us today. We're going to start with the question we ask all our guests, which is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
Yeah, it's a big question because I've got my hand in a lot of projects, but I pretty much split my time evenly between my private practice, Recourse Counseling in Phoenix, Arizona, where I kind of work with oddballs, misfits, and people who feel like they just don't quite belong. Work on self-advocacy and career planning and family relational stuff with them. Spend a third of my time with state level advocacy, getting bills through, helping counselors and marriage and family therapists, social workers understand how our legislation works here in Arizona to better advocate. And then, of course, a third of my time running an organization that I started about a little over half a decade ago called the Jewish Therapist Collective, which is a community and advocacy space for Jewish clinicians, grad students, and allies.
Most of our listeners are accustomed to us asking the question, what do therapists get wrong about this? We're not going to start the episode with that today because it's half an hour and we've got some other things that we're finding kind of important in this discussion here. So I also know that there's a lot of times in our podcast that we point to like the shortcomings of our multicultural classes that we take during grad school. I'm also just going to throw that one out the window and say, yeah, the 1 or 2 pages about Jewish clients and Jewish culture is very insufficient when it comes to this. So now that I've told you 2 things that we're not doing, there's a lot of discussion in the therapist community now. And part of why we reached out to you is an article that I had come across in the Jewish Insider where it was talking about some of the experiences of anti-Semitism in our profession, in particular over the last 12 months as ongoings between Israel and Hamas have led to lots of very strong feelings. I'm going to ask, can you talk about your experiences as part of this conversation?
I should just name first that I sit in a position of access and privilege because I'm my own boss. I don't have to deal with as much as some of my colleagues who have worked in group practices or are still adjuncting or things like that, where the power that's tethered to their salary and their dignity is held by someone else who might not get it. But the things that I've come across, I know that my peer consult groups have shifted quite a bit. One felt a little bit uncomfortable, so I stopped attending that. But examples of colleagues who are in those positions where others hold the power, I'll just list a few. Finding out that the adjunct classes that they were going to be teaching in their social work or counseling program all of a sudden were regifted to someone else who's not Jewish, getting slow rolled toward firing. So, not getting any new clients for a prolonged period of time at their group practice or community mental health, being relegated to quote unquote the bad office or being relieved of in office time at all in order to sort of induce them to leave without like sort of passive aggressive firing, finding out that, other things are going on. And then, of course, for students and interns, we've literally had interns in our community told that their very presence as a Jew is triggering to members of other populations, and alarmingly, populations that aren't necessarily Muslim, Palestinian, or otherwise Middle Eastern, just like people who random white non-Muslim therapists who think that being around a Jew is too triggering for them. It's been absolutely astounding the amount of job loss and internship reshuffling. And then you add to it the fact that especially for social workers and especially for Jewish therapists who happen to be LGBTQ or neurodivergent or of color, we have members of our community who've been sitting with the unfortunate reality that they're becoming bereft of their entire peer groups, their entire social circles. And it's been a catastrophic loss for many, many people.
What does that look like as far as the communication, especially you talked about, therapists of color, LGBTQ plus, neurodiverse therapists or neurodivergent therapists. What does that look like?
So we run trainings in the Jewish Therapist Collective. We found that there was a need to offer affinity spaces for Jewish clinicians who wanted to learn together. And so in recent trainings, we've had members of the cohort say, for example, that when they walk across their campus where they work on campus as a counselor at university, that they're having, constant sense of activation and we're dreading going back to work this fall. We've had another member of a cohort talking about how she's been without friends for months, except for through our virtual support groups. You guys know how it is when you don't have that interpersonal contact, that ability to lean on people, co-regulate with them, and know that you're part of something. It kind of knocks your feet out from under you.
For sure. And I know in the Jewish Insider article, there was also conversations around what's been happening in therapist Facebook groups. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, and I should mention, so you're probably referencing the Chicago list. Our Chicago chapter is one of the largest, actually, I think the largest chapter, aside from our social work council within our organization. There was a situation where we believe it was a gotcha question, where you ask for referrals when there really isn't a client that you're looking for. You're just kind of looking for people who identify with a certain layer of their intersections happen to include X, right? So someone had posted that they were looking for a Zionist therapist, and a bunch of people got named on this list, including people who don't have public political affiliations. They work, they work their jobs, right? And unfortunately, this list got taken into a group called, I think it was like anti-racist Chicago therapists or something like that. And someone made a list of what they called like the Zionist therapist list that no one should refer to. And none of these people had anything political on their websites. They didn't have anything about identity like that. And it was a situation where, while Jewish Zionism, it's just about recognizing and holding space for ties to our ancestral homeland and the idea that Jewish people should be able to live in their ancestral homeland, not at the expense of anyone else, by the way. But the majority of American Zionists happen to be Christian Zionists, right? The entire list was Jews. And so if you were writing a list that were specifically targeting people for their politics, you would think it would be representative of society on whole, but really it was a list of Jews. And the fact is that I don't think anyone on that list had made any kind of public political declarations. And so that kind of thing, we saw it in Nazi Germany. We've seen it in other situations. It leaves people tremendously unsafe. It left people looking for more security at their offices, reaching out to government officials to figure out what to do. And by the way, that was the only one that we know of that got so big on Facebook that there was a paper record of it for the news to pick up. There are those lists in Berkeley, in Pittsburgh, all over the country. There are people who will no longer refer to Jews. And just to be clear, I'm not conflating Jewish with Zionist. Like if you look at the DNC conference that they had like this past week, there's footage of protesters going after people just because they were wearing Jewish accessories, yarmulkes, the little skull caps, or fringes coming out of their shirts, things that Orthodox Jews might wear. They weren't making any proclamations about Israel one way or another. They were being attacked for simply looking Jewish. So, if people don't want to conflate the two, then they shouldn't harass people in ways that conflate the two.
Therapy Notes not only combines billing, scheduling, notes, and more into one easy-to-use platform, they now also offer secure client and practice messaging. It's never been easier to run your practice. Plane, train, you name it, access is just a click away. I know that one of the things that you had wanted to talk about maybe a little bit, because I think there's a lot of conflating one thing with another. There's a lot of confusion. Can we maybe ask what therapists need to know about Judaism and Jewish culture to understand this conversation as well as Jewish therapists and clients?
Yeah. So, I guess the big thing is that therapists need to know that it more likely than not, you were not given an accurate piece of multicultural education, like Curt said earlier about Jewish folks, right? Grad students do not get accurate or appropriate multicultural competence about Jewish identity. It's shocking to me how little people actually know, to the point where, especially in today's society, I think what's really difficult is that the Jewish family tree, because we're an ethno-religion, right? So many of us don't necessarily, it's not like Christianity or Islam where the religion might have spread beyond various tribes or various communities where the religion kind of had movement, whereas the community did not. Judaism is a lot more tethered to migrations and to specific communities. I don't need to go all the way back, but the shorthand is that Jewish communities that lived in diaspora in Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, around the Mediterranean, Morocco, India, China, Ethiopia, Nigeria, like we're all related. And it might sound strange in a modern time when, it's so odd to me that, we finally have accepted that gender is a spectrum, but we're dead set on seeing race as a binary. And here you've got this group called Jews where our skin complexion ranges from the palest pale to the darkest dark, and, all sorts of eye color, facial features, geographical heritage that happened after leaving our ancestral homeland. And so at quick glance, you might think you can code us as, oh, this one's of color, this one's not, or something like that. But there's a lot more that ties us together than things like that. And so it's really, really important to know that. I think the other piece is that Jewish people around the world were very rarely, if at all, seen as part of the communities that they most recently lived in. So, for example, passports from places like Poland, the USSR, it was, I think it said Hebrew on the passport. It didn't say the nationality of the location. So it's very, very new for Jewish people with lighter skin to be identified as part of the dominant majority. I guess there's just so many places to go with this. Suffice it to say that the most important thing is to yield to the Jewish person in front of you as far as what to know about them instead of making assumptions.
In researching for this interview, I read your blog article about the Jewish founders of psychotherapy, and you mentioned some of the same things about this recent association of Jewish people with whiteness. And I don't know that we have time to go into it here. I just want to comment on it, and I'll put a link to that in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. But in creating the Jewish Therapist Collective, it wasn't in this last year. This was more than half a decade ago, is what you had said earlier. What led to your decision to create that community, and what does anti-Semitism look like within our profession historically?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few questions there. I guess for me personally, I grew up in kind of an interesting situation where both of my parents kind of come from the research side of the psychology field. My mom worked in special ed and school psych while I was growing up, but her background is in cog psych. My dad's background is in cog psych. And so I grew up hearing stories about, what the New School for Social Research was like in New York in the 70s, and being in classes with, really incredible Jewish professors, but also having to cross picket lines on the way in that were virulently anti-Semitic. So this has been happening for a long, long time. And sitting in a field where, and I went into a different side of the field, the clinical, the really clinical side. I've got some different perspectives, but it's always been tethered to an organic interest in the field, but also a pride in the fact that, like, our culture's legacy brought a lot of this up. The discord that you feel between, sitting in a society that kind of accepts your left foot and not your right foot. And that is how Freud and Maslow and many of the field's founders experienced life. And you have to feel kind of inside and apart in order to sort of grasp a lot of the things about the psyche that sort of founded Western psychology. And you also kind of have to embrace the bravery that comes with being from a population that has been seen as different long enough that there were, and I guess are again, quotas about whether, how many of us can come to various universities. And so when I've seen those very same figures in our field who, yes, also had problematic views, whitewashed into the sort of archetype of power and dominance as though they were silver spoon-fed white people in their time, they weren't seen that way. And I think in order to honor with integrity many of the founders of our field, not only do we need to hold what, the issues with their thinking, but we also need to hold their whole career arc and sort of their station in society and what all brought together who they were and what drove them to think about human emotional pain and things like that.
How has this come up or particularly been highlighted or brought to the forefront even more since the events of October 7th and the subsequent Israel-Hamas war?
What we've seen, I think, is a consequence of it not being managed for decades. In a move to try and expand psychotherapy to the many, beautiful, incredible branches of Indigenous wisdom around the world and elevating voices that have been underrepresented in psychotherapy, Jewish voices have kind of been shat on, right? And so, unfortunately, because we haven't done a good job of holding the full picture of our field's legacy and some of the big folks, and because we haven't done a good job of speaking objectively about that, and we haven't done a good job of keeping Jewish inclusion in multicultural courses, unfortunately, we were so bereft of those working knowledges that when Jewish clients came through with the pain and the shock and everything that showed up for them after October 7th, we had a professional body that couldn't hold it. And I say this because as the leader of the largest international, non-denominational, advocacy-focused Jewish therapist group in the world, our email address was getting flooded. People were constantly requesting referrals because they'd been moving along in therapy, right? And then all of a sudden they hit a wall with cultural competence, whether it was therapists who tried to educate them about who they are. And it's like, well, no, you need to let the client take the lead here. Or therapists who just, all of a sudden their tone changed to the client and they seemed to see less of the client's humanity. Whatever happened, we had this huge schism, and there were hundreds of clients who were all of a sudden bereft of a safe space in the clinical setting. So we failed, our profession failed, and we need to pick it up. And I think there's enough space to do it without marginalizing the other population that's also being deeply impacted right now.
What do therapists need to know to support these clients?
I think the biggest thing is just dial the arrogance down. I'm going to be cold enough, right? Just like with other populations that you might not have gotten exposure to, you need to lean into the client, but you also have to have the responsibility to ask questions and try to seek wisdom, and not just from the Jews that people are holding out as tokens, because it's called a token for a reason. Like, I'm not going to, jump on anybody else's views, but if you're only listening to a Jewish person whose perspective represents maybe 5% of the rest of the Jewish population, you're probably not going to get the information you need for the Jew in front of you, right? And maybe you will, but there are ways to access consultation with Jewish colleagues. One great way, if you go to the Jewish Therapists Collective website, jewishtherapists.org with an S, we have a free weekly consult group where it's called Ask a Jewish Therapist, where confidentially non-Jewish therapists can come and ask questions to Jewish therapists to try and understand things. And that's good for Jewish therapists too, who might need some more layers of perspective. Really important to get consultation, really important to check your biases. If you start making assumptions about a client, or you notice that your sense of empathy for them has decreased because you found out they were Jewish, probably something to take to consultation, probably something that you really need to sit with to decide whether you can continue seeing the client. But if you have to dismiss someone because you need to work with your biases, don't blame the client for it, because we don't want someone to think that there's something wrong with them, that they're, just to bring up some tropes about Jews, dirty, greedy, dishonest, etc. You don't want to take a client who might have experienced being seen through the lens of those tropes and make them feel like you see them that way too. But yeah, consultation. And also, it's really important that if you're going to start using words like Zionism or Israel or Gaza or Palestinian, you need to get a breadth of education on it so that, you at least know what you don't know. And I see this a lot. I think the word Zionism itself has caused so much strife because there are some populations that think it just means that you're like a rabid, foaming at the mouth Nazi, which, I would argue isn't true. And then others like myself heard that word. The ancestral indigenous definition is just, about self-determinism in our ancestral homeland. And so if people start throwing out words, the best thing a therapist can do is say, hey, this isn't really my area of expertise. How would you define that word, just so that we're sharing a working knowledge in this space? And whatever your client defines it as, just go with that. You don't need to step in and educate somebody, but just make sure that if your client is using language that that you actually know what they're defining it as.
You learned a lot in grad school, but your years of schooling did not prepare you for owning a business, much less a profitable practice that pays you well, and it's time to bridge the gap. I want to tell you about a brand new course from Green Oak Accounting called Money for Therapists Practice Startup. This course will teach you what you need to know to get your practice's financial footing in order from the outset. This course is a must-have for private practice owners who want their therapy businesses to be profitable and financially sustainable. Green Oak Accounting is the industry leader in accounting for mental health, and they use the lessons learned from working with hundreds of practices to develop this course. They want you to avoid months or years of financial mistakes by providing you with the exact information you need to get the back end of your business set up right.
No more wondering about the missing piece. If you're ready to make wise decisions about your money and give your private practice the strong financial foundation it needs to thrive in the long term, this course is for you. Don't simply wish you had been taught how to run a business. Take action now to ensure your private practice's financial success. Visit greenoakaccounting.com/startup to learn more and to take advantage of a limited time deal on the course. I think that's so important, especially about the word Zionism. In preparation, I read a lot about Zionism to try to make sure I understood. And there's within the Jewish community, without outside of the Jewish community, there's so many different definitions of Zionism. There's political and social, and so many different types. And so I think just acknowledging that it's not one single word, there's so many different definitions is really critical to understanding that you got to look at the person in front of you.
And you know what, Katie, I think that brings up a great point too. Like, one of the hallmarks of Jewish culture, and I think Jewish people of all political persuasions would agree with this, we have this saying, and it's 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And Jewish people, Jewish people have a culture of arguing things to death and just like looking at things with a really, really fine point and zooming in on details. And I think a lot of that's because in many of our diaspora populations, we weren't allowed to do things like own land or like have bakeries and stuff. And so like we couldn't work with our hands. We kind of amped up the working with our minds thing. Sometimes there are more opinions within a demographic than between us and the outside. So it's also important to like, you need cultural competence, but every Jewish person who walks into your office might see things slightly or dramatically different from each other too.
I want to go back to when you were talking about biases, and I think that there's a well-meaning, self-recognition that we hope that every therapist has. And I'm sitting here in disbelief that there is still the strong opinions that of the examples that you gave as far as the stereotypes of Jews. Assuming that some people listening to this podcast may have more refined views of Jews, but still carrying biases, what are some of the other things that you might want people to consider that might be showing up to their Jewish clients?
Some stereotypes are the idea that we have some kind of dual loyalty to Israel. Most Jews in America do not have dual citizenship with Israel, right? We might have connections, many of us have family there, but the idea that we have some kind of financial advantages in the world or things like that, that's been going around. And even just the idea that having a felt connection with our ancestral homeland means anything negative about Palestinians. I mean, that was the most shocking thing for many of us during this particular situation. After the massacre and the kidnappings and those hostages, some of those hostages are still sitting there in Gaza. But after that, all of a sudden there was this schism where, the popular discourse made no space for you to both be fervently advocating for the dignity and freedom of Palestinian people and the continued existence of Israel. And most people in Israel and most Jews in America do feel that way. And I think what's hardest about all of this is like, as a Jew walking into a therapy office, many of us have a legacy of an orientation toward social justice, or in Hebrew, tikkun olam, to heal the world. And we fight for communities, mostly not our own, but including our own, to make the world a better place, and to know that the therapist in front of us might just assume that because we're Jewish, we don't have empathy or compassion, or we have, we think that we should just, have Gaza or something. No, like it's not accurate. And that's one of the biggest fears that a lot of us have walking into the therapy space, both with colleagues or with potential clinicians.
What I'm really taking away from you and from the rabbit hole I went down researching before we got on this call is that there's so many different perspectives on this, and we're conflating a lot of things that don't go together. Pro-Zionism isn't pro-Israeli government. There's so many different definitions of Zionism. There's so many different things that are going on in the world. And so in order to really get down to the nuance of it, we actually have to talk to people and not paint them with a particular brush.
Yes.
But I want to go back to kind of the personal here. How are you navigating this? How are you taking care of yourself? And we talked ahead of time that maybe you have some suggestions for other therapists and students and both Jewish and non-Jewish, who are facing these types of global tragedies. Like, what are some strategies to try to cope with this time in our history?
Yeah. Well, personally, the massacre on October 7th happened when I was less than a month out from giving birth. So I was waddling around knowing that I was about to become a mom, and I immediately called the hospital registrar and pulled Jewish off of my identifiers. And evidently, rightfully so, because there are physicians on TikTok who talk about not wanting to treat Jewish patients. So a lot of it is hiding my Jewishness in my personal life. My daughter's preschool does not know that we're Jewish, and they won't know that we're Jewish unless someone tells them. But it's also about being in community as much as possible. And in some ways, that's why I've kind of gone into overdrive in terms of all of the free and low cost support groups that the Jewish Therapist Collective offers, and making sure to connect with other Jewish therapists when we're traveling, and just trying to stay tethered to folks who get it from a personal standpoint as much as possible. So that's my big advice. Like, don't be afraid to scaffold the amount of advocacy you do. And if you need to do things to keep safe in certain situations, like, that's okay.
I want to express gratitude for you being a voice on our podcast and helping us along on this project and helping to educate us. And I also want to give you the space to be able to share with our audience where people can find you and the wonderful offerings that you're putting out to the world.
jewishtherapists.org. So that's therapists with an S. And we are available for consultation for non-Jewish therapists and the media. We do a lot of stuff for Jewish therapists, specifically mentoring, support, especially for grad students who might be facing anti-Semitism at school or internship. And of course, for clients who might need layers of competency in the struggle they're going through, plus someone who understands being Jewish. And we've also got some events coming up. We're taking a cohort of therapists to Israel to witness the trauma and sort of learn from what's been going on. And we're also taking a cohort of therapists to Seattle next summer, hopefully some other places down the line. And it's all about community. So don't hesitate to reach out. Even if you don't know what you're asking for and you just want to say, hey, I wanted to connect to you, we're okay with that. Connect@jewishtherapists.org.
And we will include links to those in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media, join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with this conversation. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy and Halina Brooke.
Shout out to our partner, Therapy Notes, the #1 trusted EHR among mental health professionals. Don't forget to use promo code MODERN and try them out for 2 months free.
Ready to make your practice profitable? Green Oak Accounting's Money for Therapists Practice Startup course has what you need. Visit greenoakaccounting.com/startup and set your practice up for financial success. Don't wait. Enroll today.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.